is trying to capture at the beginning of the third essay is what is the proper balance that a Jew is supposed to have in order to serve Hashem. And so the first point that he wants to make is that community and existence in the real world is very important. That's what Hashem wants of us. Hashem does not want us to live as hermits, as ascetics, separated from Olam Hazeh, separated from this world. He wants us to be a part of and working in this world, using the elements of this world, the physical elements of this world, in order to serve Him. He wants us to be part of a community, because within community, I can be enabled to fulfill many different kinds of mitzvahs. I can't give charity to the poor. I can't do acts of chesed unless I'm part of a community. I can't fulfill many of the bodily commandments, like tefillin, tzitzit, unless I have financial wherewithal to be able to afford, just talk about preparing for Yom Tov, right? I can't celebrate Pesach properly unless I have a home, unless I have a Seder table, unless I have all of the things that I need for Yom Tov. The matzah, the maror, the korban Pesach, all of these things that require that I engage with the world around me. So that's at the outset how I'm supposed to relate to Olam Hazeh, this world. He said that there is one exception. There are certain exceptions to engagement with this world. There's a certain kind of individual which is extremely rare. And that individual has lived. There have only been a few of those kinds of people who have lived in this world throughout history. One of them was Hanoch, Enoch, who we talked about last time, is known as, I don't know how much we discussed of Hanoch, but we said that he went up to heaven alive. God took him away. And there are certain kinds of people who just are misfits. There's some kind of anachronism and misalignment that doesn't allow them to live in the world that they find themselves in. It's because they are so holy and they are so yearning to be part of the spiritual realm that they no longer can relate to the physical world. That's the kind of person that we spoke about last time. Eliyahu Hanavi was such a person. Those were the two examples. And in both of those examples, we pointed out that both Hanoch and Eliyahu were misfits for different reasons in their lifetimes. Hanoch was a misfit because the world was entirely corrupt during his lifetime, and he could no longer sustain his level of devotion in a world that was descending further and further into darkness. Eliyahu was a misfit of his times because he was tasked with trying to realign the Jewish people to service of Hashem, but he found himself so far removed from the level of the Jews around him that he became frustrated, and he decreed a famine on the land because he couldn't tolerate any longer the just the lower level of the people around him. And he just found that he just could no longer relate to anyone that was there around him. So these people are very, very lofty. And the question that we sort of have to ask ourselves is, who's greater? You have Hanoch and Eliyahu on the one side, and then you've got someone who is capable of greatness and is able to diminish his own frustrations and misalignments in order to accomplish the greater good. You know, this in part is what I think Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is alluding to, and that is that it's true that a person could find himself or herself totally misaligned with the world around them, totally out of sorts, and really yearning for something so much more enlightened than everyone else around me. Like the example, the Plato's metaphor of the cave that we've spoken about many times before. The person who's liberated from the shackles of the blindness and the dumbness of the world around himself or herself. If only people could see what I see. If only people would understand. Why doesn't everyone's sleeping around me? I'm the only one who seems to be awake. Sometimes you sometimes feel that way. And you seem to be misaligned. And the whole world seems like nonsense. So Plato says in the Republic that kind of person, if he wants to really achieve his purpose, he has to go back into the cave. He's freed himself from the shackles of the cave. And everyone else is still shackled in the cave. But truly, the philosopher king has to go back into the cave and do whatever he can to free his fellow countrymen. See, Chanoch and Eliyahu, for whatever reason, circumstances perhaps were beyond their control, because their society that they had been tasked with, that they had been placed in, just was too dissonant from where they found themselves. But there are other situations where we find ourselves totally misaligned, but perhaps our purpose is to re-immerse ourselves into that sleeping world, into that slumber, so that we can free and liberate other people from their slumber. So, if any of you saw the movie The Matrix, that was what The Matrix was based upon. The Matrix was based upon Plato's Republic. It was based on the metaphor of the cave, where Neo discovers that everything is a dream and that he's really a person. So he could have just liberated himself, but no, he went back into the Matrix in order to be able to free everybody else. That was his objective. The story then, this gets convoluted after that because they didn't know how to make the second and third movies. But besides that, the premise of the film, back, I don't know, what was it, 15 years ago or so when they made it, the premise of that film was this whole idea of what is a person supposed to do when they discover the truth and everyone else around them doesn't know the truth? Everyone else around me is sleeping and only I'm the only one who's liberated. What is my role? So sometimes you have no choice. Sometimes it's hopeless. There's no way I have no way of impacting, and if the longer I stay trapped in here, I'm going to just fail. That's Chanoch and Eliyahu. They had to go straight up to Shamayim, they had to go straight up to heaven. But there are other times when it's not like that. So I just, I'll take a couple of questions.
So I just have a question. So 2 parts really. So we always say that you don't really know the benefit of what the mitzvah, let's say that somebody's doing. You could do something small that has a large impact and vice versa. You can't really judge by looking on the outside.
Correct.
So don't you, isn't there a little bit of sort of lack of humility or lack of modesty if these people think that they're better than the people around them? Really?
Yeah. So, sometimes it could be due to a lack of humility, but sometimes it could be real. You see, humility is not denial of truth. Let's say I am really better than everyone else. Moshe was the most humble man who ever lived. The Torah records that. So what did his humility demand of him? Did it demand of him that he retreat from leadership? No, he knew he was also the greatest prophet who ever lived. So how could he be the most humble man who ever lived and still know that he was the greatest?
Did he know that?
He did know that. He did know that because he experienced a prophetic experience that no one before or after him had ever experienced. So he knew who he was. He knew what his role was. He knew he was the lawgiver, right? And because God told him. Originally, he tried to shy away from it, but God said that's not appropriate. When I've tasked you with something, and God tells you, you are the one. You're the chosen one, right? So humility does not require of you to say, no, I refuse to accept the truth. Humility requires of one to say, I know who I am, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to rise to my potential. That's what humility is. That's the humility is what an awesome responsibility, like that philosopher king in the Republic has now. I've got to now free the shackles of my fellow countrymen, but who knows if I'll be able to. Maybe I'll become too lazy. Maybe my own flaws will prevent me from realizing what I'm destined to do. That's the humility involved.
But in Moshe's case, he was directly given that responsibility by God. But in this case, it sounds like more that they were just feeling that. They just felt that.
No, but the stories in the Tanakh indicate to us, Chanoch went up to heaven. Ki lakach oso Elokim, because God took him up. Eliyahu ascends to heaven in a chariot of fire. So in both of those cases, those are realities that happened. Those are real stories that happened in Tanakh because God validated what they were experiencing. He took them up alive to heaven because they could no longer function in this world. I just want to...
They also felt it. They also felt it themselves.
Well, we can only assume that they felt it. I mean, God had actually castigated Eliyahu on Har Chorev. The story that happens before Eliyahu goes up in a chariot of fire is that Eliyahu says, God, I've been extremely zealous on your behalf. And I can't stand it, the fact that people are so blind and they're wasting their lives and so forth. And Hashem then gives him this very important lesson. He brings a great wind, he brings a great fire, and then there's this small little voice, and only in there did Eliyahu find divinity. Right? So the lesson of that whole story is that sometimes all the noise and the anger and the frustration and the pent up feelings and the desire to scream, that's not where you're going to find divinity. Sometimes you have to handle it with a very still, small voice. And Hashem is everywhere. Hashem is even within the person who's completely wasting their lives. Eliyahu wasn't able to reconcile himself with that. He was just too connected to the spiritual realm. And Hashem said, okay, I understand. That doesn't mean that Eliyahu reached the apex of humanity. It could be, this is what I'm suggesting, it could be the apex of humanity is to realize what Eliyahu realized and still diminish oneself and come back and finish the role in this world, this flawed world. But for whatever reason, Eliyahu wasn't able to do that, and therefore Hashem took him up to heaven alive.
You mentioned a cave. It reminded me of another cave. Who was it that was in the cave with his son? Was it Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai or Rabbi Yishmael?
Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai.
So when he came out of the cave, is he the one that the fire came out of him because he saw the fields?
Exactly, yes.
So, and then Hashem said, you're not ready to come out and see that everyday things that people have to do to live in this world.
Exactly.
And he went back into the cave.
Exactly.
So it sounds like exactly like what you're talking about. Someone who's on a different level and can't relate to the mundane tasks that have to be done in this world, has to go back in and come back out when he's ready.
Right. Different cave, different metaphor, but it's the same. But it's a very, 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 very apropos story to what we're talking about.
And just as an aside, something tells me that 99.9% of the people who saw The Matrix have no idea of Plato's Republic.
You're right, right. That's probably true, but it's important to know that anytime you find profound storylines in contemporary movies, they're based on something much older.
But I bet you my husband knew about it.
Okay.
And his brother. Just
All right. Anyway, what happened to Chanoch? So we have a very long tradition of what happened to Chanoch, according to the Kabbalah and according to the book of Enoch, which is part of the Apocrypha. We're not going to get into all of these texts right now. But Chanoch became the archangel known as Metatron. Metatron, or Matatron, is also known as the Sar HaOlam, is known as the archangel of the entire world. And essentially, Hashem basically tasked Metatron as sort of being some kind of intermediary force to deal with all the needs of humanity. And the Gemara puts words in Metatron's mouth. It says, Nar hayisi gam zakanti, I was a young man and I became old. Lo ra'isi tzadik ne'ezav v'zar omevaket lachem. And I never saw a tzaddik forsaken or his progeny seeking bread. And the Gemara says there's no one who could possibly make that statement truthfully, because no one has a full span of human history. The only being who could possibly have ever said that is the angel Metatron. Because while it's true that sometimes you look at a small sliver of the human experience and you do see apparent injustice, but when you look at the larger frame, from the beginning of human history to the end of human history, which is what the angel Metatron is capable of seeing, then you'll see that no one is ever truly forsaken. That if we are all part of a much larger chain, we're all links in a much larger chain. So sometimes one generation may suffer, but the next generation perpetuates and carries on, and everything ultimately follows the system of justice. So if there is righteousness in a prior generation whose lives were cut short, there will be some manifestation of that righteousness and some reward for that righteousness in later generations, so that only Matatron could make that proclamation. And there seems to be a message that is being conveyed to us. Chanoch was not capable of living in that small pocket of his generation, which had become corrupt. But because he was able to rise above the corruption of his own times, HaKadosh Baruch Hu rewarded him by allowing him not only the reward, but also the great responsibility of being able to bear testimony that ultimately there is justice that prevails in Hashem's system throughout the world. Sure.
Is that the reason why there are some people who don't say Narayitim Levenshim?
No.
We have some friends who don't say that. They say,
Yeah, I know. Alan Dershowitz wrote in his book, one of his early books, he said he became a heretic because of that sentence, because he said it's not true. Well, all I can tell you is that if it's in the Tanakh, if King David said it, it's true. People who don't say it are unfortunately short-sighted. They read the text of the Tanakh too literally, without allowing it to be interpreted in its proper interpretation.
our friend learned it at Chabad apparently. He said a lot of them did that out.
I'm sorry, but I've never heard of this. Is there any other Chabad people here? You've heard of this custom?
Sure, yes, I've heard.
Yes, certain
What is
things
it?
are
What
not
is it?
there, but then there is other things that this Siddur doesn't have. It's just how it is constructed.
So so what is it? Because they don't believe it, or
No, of
because?
course.
Yeah, because there isn't such a thing as Narayitim Levenshim.
No.
Oh, in other words, no human being is capable of bearing testimony like that. It could only be said by someone who has a larger scope of history.
And this person became religious through Chabad.
I see.
I don't do
Okay.
it, so I don't do it. So.
Okay.
Había en the Birkat Hamazon, in
Yes.
the very end of the
Okay, I stand corrected. Thank you. Okay, we go on to the next paragraph on page 262. And in paragraph number 3, he says that there's a second category of people for whom solitude is appropriate. See, normally solitude and separation, asceticism from this world is not appropriate. But there is another exception, a second exception. Not someone who is so connected to the angelic realm that he has to leave this world, but someone who is in touch with the intellectual realm, which is different. See, Rabbi Yehuda Levi has a number of times already told us that there is a difference between prophecy and philosophy. Prophecy is the ability to connect with something that is metaphysical, supernatural, some kind of connection with the spiritual realm. And philosophy is the ability, is when a person, Jew or non-Jew, is able to meditate and utilize to the maximum of their ability, their intellect, to be able to ruminate and meditate on ideas that reveal truth about the world or about concepts, about reality. And so sometimes, if a person wants to reach great philosophical truths, they need to withdraw from this world because there's so much noise and there's so much distraction in this world that you need to, at times, withdraw from the world in order to be able to arrive at philosophical truth, in order for your intellect to not be overloaded. It's one of the problems that we have today, is that no one has time to meditate. No one has time to philosophize and to think about the larger issues, because we're constantly bombarded. Our senses are on overload, because anytime I try to slow things down and think about something deep, which requires some thought, I feel a buzz in my pants. And then something goes off, and then I look, and it's a memo, or it's a meme, or it's something cute, or one of my kids, or my wife, or my husband, or it's my Facebook, and what was I thinking about? So we lose track of what's really important. We lose track because we are so overcome with distractions. It's really, really a serious problem when you see, I think our generation, I think I speak for most of us, not all of us, but most of us were raised in a world where we didn't have this. So we know, most of us know what it means to spend time, perhaps even with our eyes closed, just thinking. But a lot of kids today don't even know what that means. Their brains have not even had that ability to exercise. It's one of the added benefits of Shabbos, by the way. One of the added benefits of Shabbos for kids, because it's the one day out of the week where they don't have a choice to get distracted with electronics, where they have to sort of at least have the opportunity to spend time with themselves and their big head and their, what's going on. So he says the wise philosophers are a second category of people who benefit from and enjoy solitude. They do so to purify their thoughts so that they can achieve intellectually sound conclusions. They thus arrive at truths which can answer all their questions, but they still desire interaction with their students, who provoke them with their questions and remind them of things they had forgotten. So even the philosopher is not going to seclude himself permanently. He realizes that in order to reach the highest potential of intellect, he has to be provoked by his students. There has to at times be not solitude, but also back and forth discussions between himself and his students. And therefore, these philosophers are like the ardent businessman who hates to mingle with anyone except those who can help him make a profit. This is the level achieved by Socrates and his colleagues. They don't want to have anything to do with anyone other than those who can help them in their intellectual pursuits. And therefore, these people will choose a life of removal from society, of distancing themselves. But that's not for most of us. In other words, the first two levels, Chanoch and Eliyahu, wow, that's way up in the stratosphere. A little bit lower than that is the level of the philosophers. There have been people in history like Socrates and really great thinkers. And by the way, he's not the only one to show a level of admiration for philosophers. The Rambam says that saintly people of the other nations also can merit the world to come. So there's this belief that the pursuit of wisdom, when it's done nobly and with integrity, is really accessible to everyone. And anyone, Jew or non-Jew, is capable of reaching intellectual perfection. In order to do that properly, sometimes you have to remove yourself from the physical world and re-engage only for the sake of attenuating your intellect further. So that's another category. But notice he says in paragraph 4, but we can never hope to achieve the levels of either Chanoch or Socrates, and consequently their type of solitude would be detrimental to us. No one should think that any one of us who's reading this book can really sort of say, well, I'm different. I'm like Chanoch. I'm like Eliyahu. I've really sort of reached that point where I no longer have any desire to be part of the physical world because I've reached whatever I can achieve in this world. And I look forward to the time when I don't have to live in this physical world anymore. That's just not relatable to any of us today. That was the previous discussion. And then even the discussion of becoming a great wise philosopher is really beyond the grasp of most of us, right? And so we have to be honest with ourselves that really those kinds of lifestyles are really for yichidei segula, really for just very, very few people, perhaps maybe one or two people in every generation. But the rest of the people have to be engaged in this world. And I think that this is a good place for us to leave it. We're going to learn in our next section that there's also an allowance for people even on a lower level than the first two, also to seclude themselves at time because of the prophetic experience that existed in Eretz Yisrael at a particular time in history. And that's what we'll get to, Emir Hashem, next time.